Hi, literary meaning of delegation is to assign or transfer your authority to someone else. And in Secure Access Delegation, a user of an application transfers his authority over that application to a third party application without providing the password of primary application so that the third party application can access the functions of primary application on behalf of that user. In this video, I will discuss an open standard known as OAuth for this secure access delegation. So let's start. Now this user has logged in to this primary application over HTTPS or Hypertext Transfer Protocol Secure. In this case, this primary application is Google Drive, which is hosting user data on a server. So user is the resource owner of this user data, and the server which is hosting the user data is the resource server. Now there is a third party application known as printing service. So it is acting as a client in this scenario. So user is using this client or third party application as a tool to print out his pictures hosted on the resource server of primary application. But since there is no trust between the third party application and the primary application, therefore the primary application won't allow third party application access to print out the user's pictures hosted on resource server. So in order to do that and to delegate the user's access on the primary application to third party application, we will use this open standard of OAuth for this secure access delegation so that the user can assign his functions on the primary application to this third party application without providing the passwords. So what happens that the primary application has set up an authorization server for this purpose, and the third party application will approach this authorization server seeking for the resource on behalf of resource owner or user. So authorization server will then approach the resource owner asking for his permission to allow third-party application to access to particular features of the resource server. After getting permissions from resource owner or user, the authorization server will provide an authorization token to third-party application. Later on, the third-party application will approach the authorization server with the same authorization token asking for an access token to an API which is there on resource server so that the third-party application can print out the user's pictures hosted on resource server using the API of resource server. So authorization server will provide the access token to third-party application, and then the third-party application will approach the resource server API with the access token. So after validating the access token, the particular resource will be provided to third-party application, and in this case this resource would be a function of printing user pictures hosted on resource server. So in order to operate, the client or the third party application has to register itself with authorization server with a callback URL so that once a resource owner or user will allow the authorization server to give authorization token to third-party application, then the resource owner or user will be redirected to the third-party application on its callback URL. Now there are certain types of access permissions which a resource owner can delegate to third-party application or client. In this scenario, we have discussed the grants or permissions to provide authorization token to third-party application. So this authorization token was provided by authorization server to third-party application. But there could be more grants or different types of grants. For example, implicit grant, password grant, and credential grants. Now there are certain related standard to OAuth. For example, this one spells like OAuth, but it is a reference architecture for authentication, whereas the OAuth, which we have discussed earlier, is an open standard for authorization. Second standard is OpenID, but this is an authentication standard or authentication protocol, and OAuth is used complementary to OpenID, where the OpenID will be used for authentication, and furthermore, once an OpenID provider or identity provider once provide the response of identity, so in addition to that, it will also provide access delegation once OAuth is used complementary to OpenID. This is OpenID Connect. So OpenID Connect is an authentication layer on top of OAuth. So while providing the response or authorization token, once the authorization server will provide this authorization token to third-party application. So besides providing this authorization token, an identity of the end user is also provided to third-party application. So this is an authentication layer to authenticate the identity of end user to third-party application. Now this is extensible access control markup language, which is an standard for defining authorization policies at granular level. So OAuth can be used in conjunction with extensible access control markup language, where where OAuth will be used for ownership consent and access delegation, and extensible access control markup language will be used to define authorization policies at attribute and context level. So OAuth can also be used to define authorization policies, but it is identity based, whereas this extensible access control markup language is more granular than OAuth, and it can define the authorization policies at attribute level and also keeping in view the context. So this was all from my side. Please stay connected. Thank you.